All right, 2 Chronicles 15, let's call this one Before You Give Up, because before David completely gives up on the thought of bringing the ark into Jerusalem, he is going to try again in this chapter. And spoiler alert, they're going to get it done. But before we get there, the chapter is going to describe for us the way that David built his own house and a place for the ark, which is going to be important for later chapters, because David is going to look at his house and the place he's carved out for the ark, and he's going to be really disappointed in the place that he has set aside for the ark, thinking that he should do more. But that's a later conversation for a later chapter. At this point, the chapter is going to talk about the way in which David has not only built his house, but is going to continue to try to make a place for the ark and get it situated in that place, if he can get it carried without getting anyone else killed. And to do that, he is going to look back on the history and, as we mentioned in previous lessons, acknowledge what they did wrong. So he is going to set up a structure that is more consistent with the advice that God gave them from the beginning on how the ark needed to be carried in the first place. After David gets all that planning done and working out with the Levites how it's supposed to be done, the chapter ends up by letting us know that they actually get it done by having the Levites consecrated for carrying the ark, which they actually will carry into the place that David has set aside for it. And it is much cause for celebration, because this time nobody dies. However, as we got a chance to see in the last chapter, not everybody is always on the same page at a happy occasion. And so at the end of the chapter, we're going to see David's wife, Michal, the younger of the two daughters that Saul had promised to David in marriage. They're now together, and not all is good in that household, because as she sees David celebrating as the ark is brought into its place, she is going to be super upset, and we don't get a whole lot of insight as to why. And so don't need to speculate as to why she is upset, but this is a reminder that when we get upset, we would do well to understand before we act out of our frustration, that we consider whether or not God is on the same page, understanding our theme of God going before us. It's not only the case that we need him to go before us in our battles against others. Sometimes we need him to go before us in our battles against our own emotions. And so in contrast to Michal, who simply responded out of her own anger, not out of any deeper wrong that David had done, David, because of his relationship with God, even though he had just made a mistake that got Uzzah killed, appears to have had a relationship with God that encouraged God to take over once his plate got too full, which helps us to understand this. God understands the weight of what we are going through. And so when it says, "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord, I will repay," even though it doesn't seem like he responds at every moment we might want him to take over for us, he understands the amount of weight that we are able to bear. And as we said, as opposed to other situations where David showed a lot of patience, this is a situation where, regardless of David's level of patience, God was only willing to give Michal one strike, understanding all the things that David had been through up to this point. But likewise, it's not just David who allowed God to go before him yet again, this time in a personal situation, but the Levites this time, even though they're carrying the ark in a way that might have required a little more labor, are doing it in a way that's going to produce a lot more success, understanding that they're going to carry the ark by hand, consistent with the way that God had told them it needed to be safely transported in the first place. And this time they're going to get it done. Understanding this as well, that there are times in life where in the small frame, if we frame the issue narrowly, as we talked about before, it could look like it is working smarter to carry the ark or the arcs in our lives on a cart. Hey, it's more technologically sophisticated. It requires less manual labor, but we do not always understand times in which God is asking us to do things in a way that might seem more difficult in the smaller context, because doing them that way might actually be a better fit with the larger context of what he has for us to accomplish. And so there are times, as we mentioned before, that working smarter in the smaller context is a horrible fit with the way that the job needs to be done in the larger context of where we fit, and helping us to remember once again that much like God took David to battle on a longer route in his second fight with the Philistines about a chapter ago, this time we're getting a chance to see how giving God a chance to go before the Levites encouraged God to make everything else in the larger context of what they were trying to accomplish a whole lot easier.